Lake County, Florida, and welcome to Around the House, sponsored by ReMax Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and you're listening to my 790 AM WLBE in beautiful Leesburg, Florida. The show is also being aired today on Lake Sumter Television, that's LSTV, and Appleseed Marketing. ReMax Lumber is leading provider of building materials in the Villages, Leesburg, Mount Dora, and Ocala. And since 1945, Central Floridians have been visiting the location in Leesburg for all their construction needs. At ReMax Lumber, you can buy where the builders buy. One of the most important industries in Lake and Sumter County is the real estate industry because so much is tied to incomes, jobs, wealth, and security. Since the financial collapse in 2008, the real estate market has probably been one of the biggest issues in the American economy. It looks as if housing and real estate is finally turning around, but it's still a little spotty and there's still a lot of headwinds. Today we have two experts in real estate who are going to discuss the market, how you can buy and sell properties, plus tips for surviving the home buying process. ReMax Premier Realty has offices in Ocala, the Villages, 2 offices in the Villages, and Mount Dora. They have a total of 4 offices, and they are leading realtors in Lake, Sumter, and Marion counties. They're a full-service realty business which can handle all forms of real estate transactions. Nancy Deichman is the owner of ReMax Premier Realty, and her son, Kevin Branch, is responsible for the company's business development. I think you'll find their answers very provoking, thought-provoking, especially if you're considering buying, selling, or renting a new home. With that, I'd like to introduce Nancy Deichman and Kevin Branch with ReMax Premier Realty. Nancy and Kevin, how are y'all doing today?
Doing great, Don. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
It's a good day. First off, Nancy, why don't you take a few minutes and tell our listeners about ReMax Premier Realty and where your offices are located?
Yes, sir. ReMax Premier Realty has been in existence since 1988. We have one office in Ocala, just off of Southwest 17th Street on Easy Street behind the Paddock Mall. We have a Villages office at the north end of the Villages on Highway 441, just down from the Villages Hospital. Mm-hmm. We have the south end of the Villages covered with our Fruitland Park office, which is on 466A, just outside the Villages. And 2 weeks ago, we just opened up an office in Mount Dora down on Donnelly Street, close to the downtown.
And I understand one of my good friends, Karen Sattel, is now working for you in the Mount Dora area.
She sure is. We're glad to have her.
Yeah, Karen knows a lot of people over there.
She's awesome.
I'm sure that today a lot of questions are going to be answered. That's going to bring up a lot of other questions for people watching the show and listening to the show. Mm-hmm. If they would like to contact you afterwards, what's a good number or website or email they can contact you at, Nancy?
If they want to contact me, they can call me at 352-427-5704. My email address is nancydeichman@remax.net, or they can just go to our website, which is findthevillageshomes.com.
So multiple ways of getting hold of you. And it seems like you guys have got the entire area covered. So whether you're in South Lake, Mount Dora, the Villages, Marion County, wherever you see this broadcast, you should be able to provide some good information on real estate.
Absolutely.
Nancy, let me ask you the big question, and I guess this is probably the most important question to ask. Mm-hmm. Is this a good time to buy and sell a home?
This is a great time to buy. The interest rates are still at record lows. Homes are still affordable, although prices are increasing. So if you're a buyer, now is the time to buy. If you're a seller, what you want to look at is you probably have had some appreciation, which is a great thing. We waited a long time for that.
Right.
And so there is appreciation in the market. And if you're in a 55-plus community or close to it, the snowbirds are getting ready to pounce on us, and that's a good thing. So our busy season starts in October, November, and lasts right on through April. So if a seller wants to put their home on the market, it's a great time.
But let's be honest, it's not like it was in 2005 for a seller or a buyer, you're going to sort of have to work pretty hard through the process.
Absolutely. It's a different market than it was then. And we're not sure we want it to be 2005 again either. That was a little crazy. But it is still, we are recovering, and the market is in a recovery. It's a very careful recovery. But prices are good again, and that's what we needed to see.
But we're still probably 30-40% off the highs of 2005. Isn't that the general
I
trend?
think we're closing in on it a little closer than that now, in pockets. You know, in the Villages market in particular, it's a hot pocket because the inventory's low.
Right.
And when the inventory's low and there's more buyers than there are sellers, then the prices are going to go up a little bit.
Well, the Villages has been the mainstay, of course, during the complete total downturn. But
Right.
outside the Villages, I know there's some different headwinds. And
There sure are.
And Kevin Branch, who's over business development for ReMax Premier Realty, you look at the markets, and one term I like to use, it's sort of like micro markets. For example, this is my personal opinion. I think there's a micro market around Ocala. There's the Villages, then you have North Lake County, and you have South Lake County. And I know you guys are basically covering all those areas. Let's talk a little bit about each one of those markets, and what do you see as some of the challenges as well as opportunities? So, for example, if someone has a real estate or a house in southern Marion County, that market, what are you seeing up there?
I would say, Don, that the common denominator is attaching itself to the Villages. If someone needs to sell their home and they're north of the Villages, south, east, or west, the best thing they can do is describe their proximity to the Villages, how close they are to the Villages, because a lot of residents, you got 60,000 homes inside the Villages, and that seems to be the epicenter for all of real estate around it. And you've got north of there, you've got Summerfield, you've got Bellevue, you've got Lady Lake, you've even got Marion Oaks for the workforce community. You have a lot of housing all around on each side of it. You've got people live as far away as Mount Dora and work in the Villages. So you have the financial services and medical industry. So there's a growing need of housing for professionals and medical industry wise, and then there's of course the baby boomers. We're only about 20% of the way through the baby boomer generation, and with real estate the way it is around the country, it seems like the safest place to buy or sell real estate is right around the Villages proximity.
Well, I've had this discussion with other people in real estate. Central Florida, especially Lake and Marion and Sumter counties, because they're away from the coast, there's some inherent advantages via
Yes.
flood insurance and taxing. And long term, do you agree with the analysis by a lot of people that this is probably going to be the growth pod of the state of Florida?
It sure feels like it. I agree with it. What I like about it, and being around it for so long now, in real estate almost 20 years, is the fact that you love to go to the coast. We live in Florida. We love to drive to the beach. The great thing about being in this area is that people can do a day trip on either side of the coast. In 90 minutes, they can be on the Atlantic Ocean, or 90 minutes they can be on the Gulf of Mexico. So it really does offer everything that we need here.
And the challenge for coastal areas, of course, is high flood insurances and stuff like that.
Definitely.
That's everyone says that's a looming disaster on the coast if we get a major hurricane.
You're right. You have some major insurance carriers who haven't been writing insurance in the state of Florida for the last 8 years.
Of all the micro markets, Kevin, where do you find the strongest headwinds? So if you had to take Southern Marion, the Villages, of course, is doing great. The North Lake or South Lake areas, where are you seeing the most headwinds now?
It's a little bit of all of those areas you mentioned, just on the edge, on the cusp of the Villages, but also on the cusp of that North Lake County. I call it Northwest Lake, and then, of course, Northeast Sumter.
Yeah.
And of course, south, the very southern eastern tip of Marion, and it's almost created its own market. So.
Okay. You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by ReMax Lumber, and our special guests today are Nancy Deichman, the owner of ReMax Premier Realty, and Kevin Branch, who is responsible for business development for the company. And we're talking about real estate, and it's amazing all what's going on. But if you're thinking about building a new home, putting an addition on, or maybe a remodel, well, the first thing you're going to need is a good set of plans that meet Florida's strict hurricane codes. Let the ReMax Design Center help you with your next set of construction plans. Jeremy Lipham does outstanding work, and his group has some of the best prices in Central Florida. But just as important is your plans getting drawn, the other big aspect is picking the right products. And by going to the ReMax Design Center, you're able to pull products out of the Design Center and put into your plans. Give them a call at 352-787-4545, 352-787-4545. Kevin, we're talking about real estate, and in your view, what's the biggest challenge in selling a home in these markets today?
I would say that, price, is very important. Price is critical, and the condition of the home, how that owner keeps that home, how it looks, and how it especially first impressions, and then also the exposure. We always say in real estate that the seller controls the price, but as real estate agents, it's our job to give them the best exposure possible.
One thing that I've heard, though, is that we've finally gotten off the very, very bottom where the lowest price is winning on a lot of the houses.
Definitely.
Now you're starting to see some appreciation in real estate, and buyers are not having to take ridiculously low prices or third offers that are lower and such as that. Are you starting to see where people are getting close to asking price and maybe above?
In certain price ranges, when it's very active in the, let's just say, the mid price range, your higher end homes do take a little longer to sell because there's a smaller pool of buyers out there for your, let's say your 750 and up price points. But your average price range in the areas they are selling, there's limited supply. There's a large demand. There wasn't a lot of houses built after 2006, which was the start of our downturn. But now it's become a seller's market.
Isn't some of the problem, though, Kevin, that there's not a lot of, you hear about the foreclosure numbers, and we're going to talk
Yes.
a little bit about foreclosures later. But isn't some of the problem the quality of housing? In other words, while there may be more houses on the market that are technically available, quite a few of them most people wouldn't want. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, that's very fair. Because the banks, it took so long, especially in Florida, and I'm glad that we had the laws that we did because it protected a lot of homeowners. But you had thousands and thousands of people that went through bankruptcy, short sale, foreclosures. So there was a lot of shadow inventory that clogged up the market. Some of those homes were maintained well by the seller, the homeowner, or the bank, and some weren't. And those homes are not real good, and they do clog up the market. We factor that in when we're pricing a person's home, and we want to also, for buyers, most of those buyers want a home that's in good condition that they can move in.
Absolutely. Now, earlier in the housing collapse, Kevin, there's a situation where all houses were viewed the same. I'm beginning to see that the market is starting to segregate the distressed houses that are on the market from the houses that are ready to move in. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair, very fair. It's a home that is ready to, receive occupancy with a new buyer is worth more potentially, obviously, than a home that could take 90 to 120 days to get approved on a short sale or a bank foreclosure. People look at something like it's got a little bit of a stigma, but if the home is ready and in great condition, it does seem to get a better price that it usually brings.
And let me ask you probably just as important question. Do you believe the market will continue to improve, and what do you think home pricing will do this next year?
I believe it will improve. I've seen a great improvement, and it simply comes down to supply and demand. The need for housing, because we're only about 20% through the baby boomer generation. I'm Generation X. It's the smallest generation out there, and then you've got the millennials, these under 35 professionals. They need housing, and they need good housing, good, affordable, clean housing, and so that demand is growing. They're 83 million strong. That's the size of the millennials, and they complement the baby boomer generation so well and provide services, the financial services, the medical services. So the demand for, and 2/3 of the homes, for instance, in the Villages area sell are cash. That actually is a very safe net for us in the economy because it provides the stability of jobs for so many people. I mean, we're blessed to be in this area.
Isn't some of the problem, I don't want to get into economics, there's a lot of people, the real number they say if you're looking at housing is households not being created. They're down. Yes. And there's a pent-up demand. In other words, kids are living with parents, parents are living with kids. And if the economy were to actually strengthen, you could see an explosion of people wanting housing. Isn't that a possible boom?
Yeah, we've read that, and a lot of economists have said there's potentially a housing crisis because in 2006, 65% of all the homes built in the United States were either investment homes or second homes. So that was where there was a huge influx of inventory, way oversupplied, and that's what destroyed our market, potentially. And then now it's coming back. And now you had those young people who combine households and people that did things for economic reasons. And we call them the boomerang buyers. The boomerang buyers are coming back because now you can actually get a mortgage 2 years after a short sale. In some cases, there's an FHA back to work program that if someone had a short sale 12 months ago or foreclosure or bankruptcy, if it was job related because they lost their job, there's a program that FHA has to get them back in a home ownership, situation.
And I think the biggest thing is people don't realize the economy continues to grow. Nationally, 150 to 250,000 people every month, enters the workforce. And Florida is finally growing again, isn't it, Nancy?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. First off, Nancy Deichman from Premier Real Estate in the Villages, Ocala, Mount Dora. They're our guest today, along with Kevin Branch, who is in charge of business development. But I'd like to ask you a question about the home buying process. A lot of people are scared to death of it. As a seller, when you look at it, you don't know where to begin. And, you hear stories, people try to do it themselves, and they generally fail. Why don't you take a minute to talk about the home buying process from a seller's perspective? Because a lot of sellers still believe that they're financially underwater and they don't even try to sell their homes. Talk a minute about that and then the process to find out if their house is above financial water where they can sell it.
That's a very good question, Don. And you're right. A lot of people don't know that their situation may have improved simply from appreciation on their home. National Association of Realtor statistics tell us now that only about 10% of the homes in the market are underwater, which means the people owe more than the house is worth. So our situation nationally has improved. Not quite as much in Florida because Florida was such a growth state to begin with, and as Kevin said, so many houses were created during that time frame. But the best thing a seller can do is contact a realtor and get a full-blown market analysis to see what their neighbors' homes are selling for, and that they may be able to, at this point, sell without having to be a short sale. If they don't have to sell and they still owe a lot, they probably should sit tight for a little while. But if they'd like to sell that home, they need to find out what it's worth. And so if they can call a real estate agent or call a realtor and find out a true market analysis and look very closely at that market analysis, they may be able to sell their home and move on and perhaps even buy a new one where they thought they wouldn't be able to.
So if someone's listening or watching the show today and they have a home and they're not sure, can they call you, and is there any charge for a market analysis?
That's another good question. There's no charge for a market analysis. They want to make sure they get an experienced realtor, and yes, they can call our office, and any of our agents would be able to help them with that. It's like a consultation, and it's free. There's no charge, and it's good information. It's very good information, and if they're not quite ready yet, then they would need to get an updated one when they are ready to make sure that they price their home to sell.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by ReMax Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and if you're listening to this, we're on my 790 AM WLBE in Leesburg, Florida, or if you're watching it today, you're watching it on LSTV, Lake Sumter Television, and Appleseed Marketing. Say someone calls you, have a market analysis done, and their house is not financially underwater and they want to sell. Take us through the process. What's going to happen then? What do they need to do to start the process to selling a home, and not only a home, but a piece of land or whatever?
Right. Well, if it's their home, they want to make it, get it to the market ready, so to speak. We want to declutter the home. Any unnecessaries, we want to get them out of there and make the home look bigger and brighter and shinier. So you want to depersonalize, get any personal pictures down, and make it look as much like a model as they possibly can. They want to make it accessible. Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have people in your office that can give good advice to potential sellers on this?
We do. All of our agents are trained in that area, and we actually have a booklet that we can mail them or email them if they'd like. And it's 11 tips on how to get the most money for your home. And it talks a lot about getting the home ready, also making it available on short notice for showings, because a lot of the buyers that are coming into the market are here for a very limited time, and they need to see the homes while they're here. So if you say, no, you can't show it this week, come back next week, they're not going to be here next week, more than likely.
All right, so you talk to the people, you've given them advice on how to declutter and all that. What actually happens from then?
Then we'll have a photographer or the agent who might be very trained in photography come in and take as many photos as possible, work up a virtual tour on their property. We're going to put it out on multiple websites and start doing the marketing.
A virtual tour is taking pictures and it'll be on a website, right?
Yes, on several websites. So the realtor's going to want to give the home as much exposure as possible. You're going to have a lot of inquiries. Some people right now have looked at what's on the market and they're not choosing that home and they're waiting. So you may have a situation where as soon as it hits the multiple listing, a realtor's going to call to show it right away.
Okay. What type of contract or paperwork will they have to sign with you?
They sign an exclusive right of sale listing agreement.
Okay, and what does that do?
That officially puts their home available for any of the realtors that are members of the board, a member of the MLS system, to be able to show it. And if they bring a buyer who's willing to buy the home and we negotiate a contract, that their home will close and the realtors will get paid and everybody's happy.
And typically, how long is that agreement good for?
Well, typically it's a 6-month agreement.
Okay, and you don't have an auto renew feature to it?
No, sir, we don't.
Okay, so you're going to sign this agreement. You're going to give them good information. You're going to tell them how to sell the house. You're going to take pictures, put a sign on it, put it on MLS. You're going to do a virtual tour. What's all this cost the seller?
Well, it doesn't cost them anything until the home sells. And
Okay.
our commission is negotiated at the time we list the property, and that's what the realtor would get paid at closing.
And
so
so
it's free until it closes.
And so they're going to know that up front.
That's right.
Okay. Here's a very important question. In your view, what's the biggest mistake most people make when they're trying to sell a home?
To me, the biggest mistake that I see people make is they want to inch that price up higher than the market analysis. So what happens is the realtor will go in and say, well, this is what it's showing your home is worth based on similar homes in the area with similar size, similar condition, and they come up with a market analysis price. And the seller usually wants to start off considerably higher than that price and then come down later. And that's the biggest mistake that we see sellers make. What we'd like to do is price the home more competitively and get more than one buyer interested at the same time, which can bring the sales price actually up. We do see quite a few multiple offers when that happens.
Okay, so what you're saying really goes against what a lot of people probably
It does.
feel. You know, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to want, say, $150,000 for the house, so I better ask $170 because they're going to try to work me down $20,000. You don't
Right.
suggest that.
I don't suggest it at all, but that's what most sellers feel. They just want to price it higher just to see if they can get that higher price, or just to leave a little bit too much room for negotiation. If they'll list the price competitively and stick to it, they're much better off in the long run.
So your best advice is if someone's got a $150,000 home, list it for $150,000, and if someone offers them $140,000, you say, I can't take it.
That's correct.
Okay. We're having a great conversation this morning with ReMax Premier Realty, Nancy Deichman and Kevin Branch, and we're going to talk a lot more about real estate when we come back. It's so many more questions I've got to ask, and hopefully y'all can give me the answers. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back to Around the House, sponsored by ReMax Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and you're listening to my 790 AM WLBE in beautiful Leesburg, Florida. And if you're watching us today, you're watching us on LSTV, that's Lake Sumter Television, and Appleseed Marketing. We have a great show today. We have Nancy Deichman, who is the owner of ReMax Premier Realty, and they're located in Ocala, the Villages, and Mount Dora. And we have Kevin Branch, who's in charge of their business development. And we've been talking about buying and selling homes in the real estate market here locally. And great information. Once again, if someone hears something they like and would like to talk to you a little later, Nancy, what phone number can they reach you at?
They can reach me at 352-427-5704.
And great information. We were talking just before the break about sellers' responsibilities and how to sell a house. Big question when people are selling a home. You know, first off, they don't want to give the realtor a key. And I've heard people say, I want to set up, you got to set up appointments and you've got to do this. Talk about those type of roadblocks, because I've been told by other realtors, those are hard to go around.
They are. We try to accommodate as best possible a seller. The best thing a seller can do is give the realtor access and be gone when the house is shown. The seller feels that, and understandably so, that they know the house better than anyone, and they sometimes want to take charge and show the house themselves. But when the buyer comes in, what the buyer really wants to do is feel the ambiance of the home and feel like, what would it be like if I lived here? Mm-hmm. And if the seller is there, Don, it's an impediment. It really doesn't let them feel like, well, I could live here. So they feel like emotionally that this house belongs to the seller and not to them, or not potentially to them. So it actually can do harm. The best thing a seller can do is if they're home when the realtor gets there with the buyer, is just take a walk, and give a little faith and a little trust, and it usually works out.
It also, to me, stymies the selling process for the realtor, because the realtor will have to change what he says to the potential buyer. For example, if a buyer were to walk in the house and say, I really like the living room, but I would change the colors. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not going to say that with the owner there.
They're not going to say that with the owner there, because they don't want to hurt the owner's feelings.
And hence, the realtor may say, oh, yeah, you can get D&D paint company to redo it, and it's no big deal, might cost you a couple $100, right. And hence you could sell the house, but that could be a real hindrance one day.
It sure could.
Now, Kevin, we've talked about the seller's point of view on the house. Let's talk about the buyer. A lot of people, and it's hard to believe when they go to look for properties, and with the internet and stuff, the internet's made do-it-yourselfers out of all of us. We're do-it-yourself lawyers, we're do-it-yourself doctors, do-it-yourself bankers. We do everything ourselves. But to me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, to look for a home, you really need a realtor, don't you?
I agree. I believe so, especially in this area, because it's unique, because you have Marion Lake and Sumter County, and you have two totally different MLS systems, multiple listing service. And see, Mid-Florida is one that most of the realtors in the Lake and Sumter use. And then the homes that are in the Marion County, which is a portion of the Villages and a portion of the north side of Lady Lake and Summerfield and a lot of those communities, it's Marion. So really, if your home's anywhere close to that, it needs to be in both systems. Mm-hmm. And if you're searching for a home in that, you need to be able to search through both systems, and you need a realtor who is well-versed in those areas. So I believe it's very important.
Well, your realty company, for example, you're in Marion County, you're north and south of the Villages, you're now in Mount Dora, you spread a wide net. That's sort of important too, because you may have people come from a certain area that has a different view of the housing market.
Absolutely. And I believe if someone's relocating to this area as a buyer, as the question was, if they were leaning towards, after they get to know us, and that's the thing, it's important to interview each other. It's a relationship. That buyer and that realtor have to get to know each other, and that loyalty works both ways.
A lot of people will make a call, first realtor shows up, and that's their realtor. And I think sometimes that's a mistake.
I think you're right.
How do you select the best realtor? In other words, I would assume that you're going to say that ReMax Premier Realty all the realtors are great, but different people for different folks. How do you select the best realtor for yourself?
I believe that the buyer needs to know exactly what they want and have an idea of the location they want to be in, an area. And if that's the case, for instance, like the agents at our company, they may want to say lean towards the outdoor market, and that's where someone like Karen Sartell would be great with them, that knows that market. And then you have, if somebody wants the Leesburg to Veries market, we have someone like Sharon Bassett, for instance, is a kind of an expert in that area. And then in the villages, we have a lot of agents who live in that community themselves, and we have some in Del Webb Spruce Creek and Golf and Country Club. So it really depends on what that buyer is looking for. We try to give them and put them with an expert that we believe can help them in the area that they want.
And do you have realtors that maybe have a little more expertise in certain areas? For example, someone's looking for a house on a lake, or someone's looking for a house in horse country, or
Definitely.
or retirement community. Do you have realtors that you sort of say are specialists in those areas?
We do. If for instance, if someone was saying, I want to look for a horse farm, I'd think about someone at our company who really specializes in horse farms, and we've got a great guy like that up on the Marion County side named John Varney. He's a horseman himself, so it does depend on what that buyer's looking for and the personality of the agent, because the personality, you don't want to put someone who might clash with someone personality-wise. We try to put them with people that they know they're going to want to know, like, and trust and get to know.
Kevin, I'm told the biggest challenge in buying a home these days, a good friend of mine, Mary Rhodes from the mortgage firm, she was on her show a few weeks ago, had a great show, in fact, we just released a column in the Daily Commercial about mortgages, is patience. Patience. Unless you're a cash buyer, and I know this area has a lot of cash buyers, and we were talking off there how many cash buyers are in the market, but if you're someone who's going to do a mortgage, whether it's FHA, VA, or conventional, you have to have patience in the process.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about the process of finding the right home and ensuring that you buy a right home, because I've been told of a stat, and you tell me if it's a wrong stat. Most people, when they move to Florida and buy a home, they sell it within the first 5 years because that's really not the home they wanted. Is that true?
It could be, possibly. If it's in the villages, we hear an average statistic is that the most village residents move at least 3 times. And
Okay.
But there's many reasons for that. It's just such a large community that they might find more friends, and one area is a little closer than others. But, as far as the different areas in Florida, people keep traveling, and they just fall in love with different parts of Florida.
Could some of the reason why people buy different houses when they move down here initially is because where they're from, they have a paradigm of a house, and they want the same house here, but it doesn't necessarily fit the climate and lifestyle issues. For example, you had a 4-bedroom house with a big great room and all that in Minnesota, but down here you don't need but a 2-bedroom house with a small dining room. Is that some of the issues you run across, Kevin?
It is. I think in that best comparison there with what you just asked, the question you asked was that maybe up north, if a lot of people are coming from up north or the northeast, the Midwest, they may do a lot more activities indoors, because of the weather. But here you're in Florida, so there's so many things in this area to do outdoors that you really do. You see a lot less formal living and dining in family rooms and more great rooms and open areas.
How important is pre-qualifying and pre-approval letters for the buyer to have in hand when they go looking for a home?
It's critical. It's critical for many reasons, but the obvious ones is home buying is an emotional process. But the worst thing you could do is want to get your hopes up for something that may be a little bit outside your budget. So we suggest that every buyer, before they're looking for the home, that they call and they get pre-qualified for a mortgage, so they know exactly what they can afford, when they can get it, and they have more expectations that way, and that way there's no surprises.
How does a realtor manage the expectations of a buyer and to the reality of what they can get? For example, let's say it's a young couple. and they've got a budget or they pre-qualified for $200,000, but the $200,000 homes in the market doesn't meet their expectations, and really they're looking at 250 or 300, but they can't afford it. How do you manage those expectations?
It's communication and education. What we try to do is make each buyer almost an expert in the market that they're actually selecting a home in. And that way they get a good feel and sense of what homes are going for, what they can afford in this price range. And we kind of make them acknowledge, hopefully they acknowledge that the fact they understand exactly what they want. And I'd say one of the biggest mistakes is people think, well, maybe I just need to get a foreclosure. And unfortunately, foreclosures aren't always a good deal. You see people bidding on those homes, and there's far more problems with a lot of those foreclosures than we'll ever know.
And let's talk a little bit about foreclosures. Builder told me last week, said that it's getting to the point with a lot of foreclosures, not all of them, but a pretty good percentage of them. Probably the best thing for most of them is just be torn down.
Unfortunately, the ones that are,
a lot of them that are left on the market in these $40,000 and $50,000, you're going to have to put a lot of time and money in them. They're not nowhere ready to move in.
I see some buyers out there that they're holding on to the hope that one home that's been vacant and they know it's a foreclosure, but it's not on the market. They're hoping they put it on the price, but those banks they really don't want to put it at a fair price. They want that home to go up in value as the market is recovering, and they're going to ask the highest possible price for that foreclosure. And then you have bidding wars because of investors. So as a couple, like we were just describing, a young couple that wants to buy a home and move in it for their family, they're much better off getting a private seller through a realtor, and where the home is taken care of, loved, cared for, and they know who lived in it.
Nancy, someone's found their dream home. Say they found the house, one of your realtors got them a house. Take us through the process after they've selected a house to the point where they actually can get ownership of the house. What do they have to do? First thing is you go out tomorrow, you find the house, boom, that's the house, it's in my price range. What happens next?
Okay, well, they've been pre-approved for the mortgage, so they're going to go ahead and make a formal mortgage application. And we're looking at the contract, and the contract's going to say that they've got about 15 days usually to get all inspections done. So right away, they're going to want to get a qualified home inspector to do a really good home inspection.
And that's a big deal.
That's a big deal, yes.
Because unfortunately now with wind mitigation issues, the wiring issues, and the roofing issues, that could really, if you don't get a good inspection, that could come back to haunt you badly. It
very well can, and sometimes has. So they want to make sure that they get the home inspected as closely as possible. They can also be there present for the inspection if they'd like. It's a choice. They're going to get a termite inspection. The appraisal is going to be done by their lender, so they don't have to order the appraisal. The lender's going to go ahead and take care of that. According to the contract, the listing agent is also going to order title policy, so that's going to be done. They're going to get a commitment before closing that states that they've got clear title on the property. So there's a process that going through. The mortgage lender might come back and ask them a couple more questions, and the best thing they can do is get their questions answered quickly so that they do close on time. At that point, everything's done. The inspections are done. The appraisal came in great. Everything's moving towards closing. They are supposed to get occupancy at closing. That's the norm according to the contract. So if they're not going to do that, if the seller's going to want a little bit of time after the closing, you're going to have to rely on the seller and buyer agent getting together and making that happen.
But that's not typical.
Not typical, no. Most of the time they get occupancy at closing. Also, before the final closing, before they go and take their check of their down payment to the title company or the attorney who's closing it, they're going to do a final walkthrough inspection just to make sure that everything's the way it was when the inspection was done. The house is still there and the lawn's still in order and things like that.
Going back to the home inspection, a lot of people will get a home inspection, but they're unclear. You have that 15-day period. that you can back out of the sale based on a home inspection. Is that correct?
Well, what most people do is they'll come up with a list of things that the home inspector has found, and every home's got a little something.
But that's what I'm going to pinpoint down. How is there a certain qualifying thing that will allow a buyer to step back, or say they go in there and they say, well, the wiring is not kosher in one room? Can that kill the deal then at that point?
Well, if that's the case, the buyer's going to want to write in there that the home inspection is to the sole discretion of the buyer, the results of the home inspection, and that they can back out. There are other clauses in the contract that say if there's something wrong with the home, up to 1.5% of the purchase price usually, that the seller would have the opportunity to remedy that. If it exceeds the amounts allowed in the contract, then the buyer would have the opportunity to back out.
So what's the norm?
The norm is 1.5% on the repairs and 1.5% on wood rot or termite damage.
So
that's the norm.
So, for example, on a $200,000 home, you're looking at $3,000. If the home inspection requires more than $3,000 worth of repairs, the buyer at that point can walk away from it.
Right. What a lot of buyers will do is, particularly if it's an older home, is make the home inspection to the sole discretion of the buyer and give them 15 days to take a real good look.
What's the biggest challenge in selling a home today?
The biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge in buying a home,
In buying a home today. Yes. Well, finding a home at a great price. Our inventory is a little low right now, and of course builders, as you know, are starting to create product again, which is good because the market does need it. So I think the biggest thing is finding the home for the buyer at the price they can afford to pay, and not having to bid against someone else to get it.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by ReMax Lumber. We're having a tremendous conversation today with Nancy Deichman. She's the owner of ReMax Premier Realty, and Kevin Branch, who is in charge of business development. And we're talking about the buying and selling process for homeowners. And I guess to wrap up our discussion on buyers, we asked what was the biggest mistake most sellers make. What's the biggest mistake most buyers make when they go trying to find a home, when they're trying to find that dream home?
Well, sometimes they find it and they hesitate because they think there might be a better one right around the corner, and then they lose out on the one they really wanted. If they find one they really like and they're really willing to, they'd be willing to purchase it, they need to go ahead and not wait. They need to buy that home because if they want it, somebody else wants it too.
I've heard of situations in which a realtor has told a buyer the house is $175 and they're wanting to offer $150, and they've got multiple offers, and the real estate sort of tugged on and said, I don't think they're going to take this. But I know a realtor will submit an offer.
A realtor will submit an offer, but if you're if you've already been told there's multiple offers on the house, and it's best to put your best foot forward on what's the highest price you'd be willing to pay and go with that.
Kevin, let's talk a little bit about short sales and foreclosures. First off, define a short sale and foreclosure, because a lot of people look at it and they don't know what the difference is.
Well, I'd say the difference between a short sale and a foreclosure is a lot of times, first of all, the short sales are, if they're occupied, sometimes the people took much better care of it because, they stayed in the home and rather than just leave it vacated. And of course, the foreclosure is owned by the bank, and it can have still can have title issues. The short sale is obviously where the person that owns the home currently owes, usually quite a bit more than the home is actually selling for. In that case, they have to get approval by the bank. So in the contract that the buyer and the buyer's agent would write, it would say that the contract is contingent on seller's bank approval of the short sale. Go ahead.
Okay, so a short sale essentially is where before it goes in actual foreclosure, the owner of the real estate will go to the bank and say, hey, I can't afford to pay the note on the house anymore.
Yes.
And the house is underwater. Say the house was originally purchased for $300,000. It's not worth, maybe it would appraise out for $175,000. At that point, the owner and the bank would have to agree upon the $175,000, correct?
Correct.
And then they would put it on the market for sale.
Well, yes, but at the same time, most of those, the banks don't even really talk to the borrower, and they just say, get the home on the market, get a real estate agent, a good one, usually short sale expert, which we have a lot of those at our company, and price it. And you usually submit the purchase contract, the listing agreement, and the short sale package. At the time, you're actually taking a seller almost through the dequalification of the home to prove that they can't afford this home anymore. I can give you one good example to where I sold a home that the gentleman owed $480 on, bought a big, giant, brand new home in 2006 and paid too much for it, and then the market crashed. We sold his home for $220. Citibank was the loan, and he was qualified under the Mortgage Debt Relief Act. He paid no penalty whatsoever.
But those are very difficult sales to make, aren't they?
They're getting more difficult because now the banks are realizing that the market is recovering. They're no longer 50 to 70% upside down. Now they're closer to maybe 10%. So the bank sees the fact that, well, maybe we shouldn't work with these people because this is an asset for us. We might be able to get more money for it by the time it forecloses.
Now, there's some potential peril for the seller, too. Say the seller selling that $250,000 home that he bought for $175,000, and it's a $75,000 difference in the cost. If they don't get forgiveness on that deficit balance, that could be a problem later on down the line for being sued.
I believe it could, because we live in a deficiency judgment state in Florida. Right. And so, it's that Mortgage Debt Relief Act was great for your owner-occupied residents. It didn't help that many people and then the investment homes or second homes, and it wasn't extended. There's been talk of it, but you're right. If they have that balance, they've got to agree to a payment plan with the bank, and they are becoming more difficult, unfortunately.
And foreclosures is when the owner of the property just says, I can't pay anymore, I'm done, walks away from it. It goes into foreclosure. It's been taking about 2 years for foreclosure, correct?
Yes, and unfortunately there was a trend that I saw for a while when it was so bad that you had the banks contacting owners and saying, hey, we'll give you $14,000 to just do a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And it was because there's a mess in paperwork with a lot of the banks with all the robo-signatures and things like that. I tried to convince people not to do that unless they really just needed that, cash.
But now foreclosures are basically going to the courthouse steps, and I'm being told a lot of investors are buying them. Is that true?
Yes, I think that's getting more aggressive because the homes are getting back to a balance of what they're owed is what they're worth almost. So you're seeing more people at the courthouse steps.
And can your company help people when they're looking at short sales and foreclosures?
Yes, sir. Our company can, and we still have some agents at our company who do, work with a lot of bank foreclosures and asset managers, so they keep a steady flow of inventory. And I would say the bottom line is that buyer out there, they need representation. So if they're looking at buying a foreclosure or short sale, they're going to want to call a very experienced real estate agent who can represent them as a buyer agency.
Kevin, let's talk about some of the other services your company offers, plus a lot of realtors offer, from property management services to handling seasonal residents. Talk about some of the services you guys do.
We do. We have a full-service property management division, and those men and women are exclusive to the property management division. So they work with, tenants and landlords.
And let's break down property management, handling people's rentals.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And those agents, even though they're licensed in the state of Florida as realtors, they predominantly just do the rentals. And so here in the Villages area, and especially the retirement communities, you have almost vacation rentals for a month at a time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in a season, you can see that home, it's furnished, and it's 1,400 square feet, and they may get 3,000 to 3,300 with a golf cart included in it, and for somebody to rent for a month. And maybe it's 1 to 3 months that someone stays here, and those tenants usually buy while they're down here. And then you've got the long-term rentals that usually are unfurnished, and because those people want to be in at least 12 months or more.
Okay, let me give you a prime example. Snowbird season, as they call it, is from like October to March. But from April to September, I'm going to be up in Minnesota again.
Right.
Can you guys rent my house from during that period?
We can. That's a little bit more challenging, obviously, than the fall, because the fall is such a, people call our property management company and they say, we loved it. We loved our stay here. We want to go ahead and rent it again the same time next year. So right now, our property management company is really geared up for the fall season because they need more homes to rent. They've got an overabundance of tenants wanting to rent, and they have a very short supply because all the homes get occupied quickly.
And I've been told basically if you have a property that you do submit for property rental, you guys handle everything.
Yes, sir.
Maintenance and
maintenance,
janitorial
pest control, whatever. Whenever someone needs to get in that home to take care of it, we check on it for them. We've got some programs to where we can go in and look after the home while they're up north or away from the area. And they do everything from maintenance to collecting the rent.
And what are rental prices like in the area? I know the Villages is one area, but surrounding areas.
But even the surrounding areas in the family communities, let's just say, a home that used to rent for $800 a month, for the, a family community, now rents for $1,100. So what it is a supply and demand, a lot like sales. You had as many buyers as there are out there, you had an overabundance of tenants because of the foreclosure market, the short sales, the bankruptcies, the families moving in together to, cohabitating, trying to cut costs. Now those people most of them are getting back to work and steady, and they need a place to rent.
And most people don't think about a realty company helping them find a rental, and that's something you guys can do, right?
Yes, sir. We do it. Our company does it each and every day. At the same time, if they see, as Nancy mentioned on the home purchase, if they see a home they want to go ahead and jump on it with property management, it's gone yesterday.
So if someone wants to rent a home, they can call what number to?
If they want to rent a home from us and ReMax, if they want to put a home in property management, the best number for them to call is 352-671-7653. That would be the best number for them to call, and that's the property management division.
And Nancy, one thing, we're a little short on time, but unfortunately don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but you guys do a lot with commercial real estate, don't you?
Commercial's getting active too. Yes, it was. We had an oversupply there. We're back to where, especially around the Villages, you don't see very many vacancies, and developers are starting to create commercial property again, which is a really good sign.
So if someone's interested in commercial real estate, they can give you a call also.
They absolutely can. We have some commercial specialists also in our company, John Buxman and Vicki Morrison, and they'd be more than happy to help.
And Kevin, how are land sales looking in the area?
Land sales, that's probably the biggest drop in pricing at one time since 2006. You'd see people pay $85,000 an acre for a 40-acre piece that's only worth $20,000 per acre now, but thankfully it's climbing. We see the prices, escalating, and the good news is we see large developments coming, people buying land, putting the roads in, infrastructure, and building new homes. That's great.
We've had a great discussion about local real estate with Nancy Deichman and Kevin Branch from ReMax Premier Realty. And one more time, just in case someone had a question from something we discussed today, where can they call, Nancy?
They can call me at 352-427-5704, or they can go on to their phone and download the app, getmobile.remax.com.
That's great. Well, once again, we thank you for listening to Around the House and watching today. And please join us every Monday at noon at WLBE for Around the House. Till next week, we'll see you around the house.